Hello there. Welcome to the Tech Tuesdays webinar on MDM Smart Search. I am Vrinda and I'll be hosting today's webinar. This webinar will be focused for the MDM business users, data stewards, and developers who can do the search like Google text search engine for text data in the data governance entity 360 application in MDM. The presenter for this session is Prashant Gupta, lead SME MDM from the Global Customer Support team. He has expertise in different customer implementation on business entity services, smart search. He also has an enriched experience of addressing different MDM business use cases to MDM solutions like Customer 360 and Supplier 360. Before we start off, here are some housekeeping tips. This webinar is for 1 hour that includes a 45 minutes webcast, and then we'll roll over to live for 15 minutes to answer your questions. All dial-in participants will be muted to enable the speakers to present without any interruptions. Your questions can be submitted to the Q&A section and we'll be addressing them to the end of the presentation. The webinar will be recorded and will be available in the Informatica Support YouTube channel and the Success Portal. The link will be emailed to you as well. Please set aside some time to complete the post-webinar survey and provide your feedback and suggestions for the upcoming topics for the Tech Tuesdays webinars. The Tech Tuesdays webinars is a webinar series introduced within the Success Portal. The Informatica Success Portal is a micro-learning platform that offers free and unlimited learning to all registered users. The Success Portal lists your success offerings, your customer success manager information, bookings available in the Ask an Expert session, and customized recommendation and content. Over to you, Shant.
Thank you for the introduction, Vinda. Greeting everyone. So today we are going to talk about Smart Search in the multi-domain MDM 10.4. The agendas for today's session is a quick overview. What is Smart Search? What's the purpose? Smart Search architecture, the high-level architecture we are going to discuss. Configuration of Smart Search, like what are the configurations we need to set up as part of prerequisite. Once the Smart Search is configured, so what are the search APIs we can fire up? Troubleshooting Smart Search outside the MDM, like there are some scenarios where we need to isolate whether the issue is from the Elasticsearch engine or from the MDM layer. Elasticsearch methodology, like there are some different architecture, what we can set up on multiple environments. Indexing job versus load job, like there are some scenarios where we need to understand when to execute the initial indexing job or when the indexing is automatically going to take care by the MDM. What are the new MDM 10.4 features which have been brought up? Lastly, what are the performances and the best practices and the known limitations related to the Smart Search? Overview. Smart Search is actually a terminology being used in the E360 UI application where we can do the search on respective business entities. It was actually being introduced from MDM 10.x release onwards. So when I talk about business entities, right, so there are different types of searches being available. So starting with SSA name 3. So it's actually a structured one, the predefined rules we configure, right, where we should have a specific match columns, the match rule sets, and the necessary things which we go by. Coming to the queries, so here we are actually constrained by the packages, right, whatever being defined on the database, where we should be knowing what are the columns we need to search. It's not like a free form search. But when I talk about the Smart Search or the business entity queries, so it's basically it provides me a platform as a free form search where it has the ability to go search across all the fields. Let's say if I have a search, let's say if I'm searching for a word, say Prashant under the person business entity, it can search across all the searchable columns, whatever I have defined. So that's the main advantage, and we need not to do anything else as long the records are being indexed. Next, we are going to talk about the Smart Search in E360 UI homepage. So that's a quick screenshot, like whenever we do the search, how the representation is going to appear in E360 UI. Let's have a quick look on our demo. Here we have a 10.4 local environment and I'm trying to log in into the E360 UI application. So once I log in, this is the home page, and here we can, the left hand side, we can see the IDD application here, MDM sample, And in the right hand side, this is the search box where we can do a free-form search. And in the drop down, we can choose on which particular business entity we want to perform the search. At one time, we can choose only one. So let's say I'm searching for a keyword, say William. So it is going to do the search on all the searchable columns, either at the parent and child of the respective business entity. Response, I got three records: the Miguel Jenius, the William Brown, and the William D. Han. So the last two are pretty straightforward, but if I open the record number one, the Miguel Jenius, so here you can see that the child name, the city is actually marked as searchable, and it is searching on the William as well. Okay, so if I come back on the search screen, so in the left hand side, if say I want to apply some more filters, I can choose that and click on apply. It will going to refine the results. That's a quick representation how the smart search works in the E365 framework. Okay, so next is migration strategy for MDM 10.4. So as we all are aware that MDM 10.4 is being released, so there is some situation like where some customers might be performing some upgrade. So in upgrade scenarios, if someone is coming from Solar platform, so we need to do a fresh installation of the Elasticsearch, and we need to regenerate the indices for the Elasticsearch front. But for the customers who are already using the Elasticsearch, so they can simply do the upgrade to the MDM Hub 10.4 platform. So they will not be going to lose their existing Elasticsearch setup. And so majorly, we can say that there are no major changes with respect to the customers who are already using the Elasticsearch. But when I talk about the fresh installation, guys, like where we are freshly installing the MDM 10.4 on some our local environment. So the major change here is like in the 10.3 side, we were having the Elasticsearch package inbuilt from the MDM installers. But coming from 10.4, so what we need to do is we need to do download the Elasticsearch package, the Elasticsearch zip file from the Elasticsearch site. Okay, and then we need to explicitly create these particular folders. If you can see that the analysis folder and the lang folder manually, and under that we need to place up these particular files: the stopword.txt, synonym.txt, mappings one, and the stopwords file. So these files, if in case like you are not able to have these, you can feel free to reach out to GCS so that we can provide these necessary files for the same. And once all these files are being in place, then we are good to configure the smart search as the same setup. Next is Elasticsearch, a high-level architecture. So here we have a hub server and a process server in a typical MDM installation, and we have a database repository. Here we have Elasticsearch node or a cluster. So this need not to be on a same machine, right? It can be on any different machine, or it can be on any other JVM, rather than being on the same of MDM. And the same Elasticsearch directories, it's not to be necessary under the hub server third-party folder. It can be on any other path as well. Basically, it's actually for a search that we use, and it can be present anywhere. So here you can see that we have a Elasticsearch client on the hub server and the process server. So basically, it's a piece of code which assesses the situation or monitor the activities which are happening on the hub server and the process server, and accordingly it makes the call to the ES server that's being registered inside the ORS. And the way it do it from the infrastructure setting, that is under the Elasticsearch cluster, where we define the ES URL in the provisioning tool. The important point here is the call which is happening, right? So that is the HTTPS base, a secure communication. And that secure configurations, we do it under the elasticsearch.yml file. That's a quick overall architecture of the Elasticsearch. Next, we have installation and configuration of a Smart Search. So here we are going to talk about what are the steps which we need to follow as part of the setup. So the first one is the configuration of the YML file. So this file is stored at the default third-party Elasticsearch config folder. Let's have a quick look on the YML file. Okay, so I just jumped up on my MDM installation directory, and I'm on the third-party folder. So if I go under the Elasticsearch folder config, so here I can see the respective YML file. Let's see what all parameters we have under the YML file. So the first one is bootstrap memory lock. So here it actually defines for the memory locking to prevent any Elasticsearch memory from being swapped out to make it as true. The next one is cluster.name. So it specifies a unique name for each Elasticsearch cluster. If in case we have multiple nodes, then we need to ensure like the same cluster name is being defined on each node of the cluster, the Elasticsearch cluster. The next is http.port. So there are two ports being used. One is http and one is transport 9200 and 9300. So we need to make sure like these two particular ports are open and listening. The next one is network.host. So this specifies the server IP or the hostname where the Elasticsearch is up and running. The next one is node.data. So data node stores the actual index data and cannot be responsible for coordinating between the other nodes. Okay. Node.ingest, this is specifically for transform and the enriches the data before the indexing. The next one is node.master. So this is actually responsible for coordinating between all the nodes. The next one is node.name. So node.name specifies a unique name for each the ES node. The next two are part.data and part.log. So these are the physical locations where we will be able to see the indices under the data folder and the logs. If any sort of troubleshooting we need to perform, then we can refer those logs. The next ones, there are some properties where it's being commented out because it's specifically needed for the cluster scenario. And if in case we have multiple nodes, then we can just put the host followed by the specific port. Then there are some couple of properties regards to the search guard. So search guard is being used for the HTTPS secure communication scenarios. So here we are going to generate some key stores. Here you can see that there are some key stores being generated, and those key stores will be going to copy from the MDM hub server to the Elasticsearch site. Okay, so this is specifically needed when we are going to have a HTTPS based communication. So if I just quickly have a look, so under the config here you can see that we have these key stores being generated. Okay, and one more thing, like under the data folder nodes 0 indices. So here you can see that all my indices have been generated. And the same thing if I go under logs, so I can see what are my Elasticsearch logs. I can go through it. Okay, so coming back to the slides now. So the first one was the YAML, which we just spoke about. The next one are there are some Smart Search properties which we need to configure under the CMX server and CMX cleanse.properties file, which we are going to talk about in the next slide. The next is the enable search processing on the process server. So we need to make sure under the process server, like what is being registered on the ORS, that should have enable search processing checked. Next one is we need to define the Elasticsearch node IP under the provisioning tool configuration. And once all this configuration are done, so we will need to restart the Elasticsearch server followed by the MDM server. And then we can execute the indexing job. So if we are looking for some detailed explanation, so these are mentioned in the KB 564677 as well. Next is the Smart Search properties, which we need to configure under the CMX server and CMX cleanse. So let's go through one by one. So the first properties, like there are some properties which we need to define in both CMX server and CMX cleanse. The first property is cmx.ss.enabled. So it contains either true or false. So if we are using the Smart Search, we need to make it true, else we need to make it as false. The second one is cmx.ss.engine. So this defines what engine we are going to use. So right now we have Elasticsearch. So we need to set the value as ES. The third one is the ssl.keystore, the keystore password, the SSL trust store, and the trust store password. So this is specifically needed when we are using the HTTPS communication over the YAML file, right? In the YAML, there was a property which we defined as a true for the search guard plugin communication. So if we are using the HTTPS, we need to define all the key stores along with their respective passwords. The next one is EX max connection per host. So these are the maximum number of connections which is specific for a given host in a pool. So at the MDM side as well, MDM maintains a pool of HTTP connections which are specific to the Elasticsearch. Last one, we have EX max threads. So this is specifically the number of threads which are responsible for the input-output processing. Then we have the properties which are specifically for the CMX server site. Okay, so the first one is EX index refresh interval. So this property is actually in seconds. So which specifies like after how much time I need to commit the changes to the data after the initial indexing job which have been ran. Okay, so whenever you are going to search for the data, it will be available for the search after this specific time interval. So the default value is 30 seconds. The next one is CMX server batch or Smart Search initial block size. So this comes into the picture when we are executing the initial indexing job. So during job, like what will be the block size value? So that indicates the same one parameter. The next one is CMX SS dirty index disable equals to true. So sometimes we have noticed that when we launch the Hub console and traverse to the batch viewer, so it usually gets hung. So there, this property comes into the picture, like it will disable whatever the dirty index we have. It will not load it, and your batch viewer will actually load properly. So this property is needed when we have a smart search enabled. The last one, that is on the JVM side. Like if we need to add as a JVM argument hyphen d mdm.es.index client ETL time to live. So this specifies like the connection between the app server and the Elasticsearch processes. So the default value what we recommend is 86400, that is equivalent to 24 hours. So this is specifically needed. You might see when you execute an initial indexing job and like some errors coming as a connection closed or fix me. So there the property is needed for those scenarios. Next is configuring process servers. So here in the ORS, we need to make sure we should have at least one process server, which should be enable batch processing enabled, because that is specifically needed when we have the searchable configuration. And this particular process server is going to act as a client for all the search requests and will redirect to the Elasticsearch server. And whatever the indexing which we are going to execute, right? So that is going to happen on the Elasticsearch side, not on the process server side. And like if you want to register more than one process server, then that also we can do. That's not a problem. Next is configuring nodes in provisioning tool. So here, once the Elasticsearch server is up and running, okay, so then we need to traverse under the provisioning tool infrastructure settings. So where we are going to define the Elasticsearch IPs, right? Whatever the Elasticsearch servers are up and running. So here under the ES cluster, the ES node, we are going to define the node name. So this node name should not have any sort of special characters. That's the one thing. And the URL, this will be the IP or the host name of the Elasticsearch. So as you can notice that it is a HTTPS one, a secure communication. Okay. If in case if we are having multiple nodes in the Elasticsearch cluster, so we can just add one by one, followed with the node name and the URL. So once all these configurations are done, so you can just do a save and publish the changes and followed with the validate of the ORS. Next is configuring the searchable BE parameters. So once we log in inside the provisioning tool, right? So and traverse to the business entity specific column. So we will be able to see these all parameters. So this is actually very much important because if this configuration is not in place, then we will not be allowed to do the search. So the first one is searchable. So once this is particularly checked, right, then we will be allowed to do the search on that specific column. The next one is suggester. So suggester is something like how you do some search on the Google, right? So as soon as you start typing, you will get some suggestions. So same way it is going to work over here. Just there is one recommendation, like do not enable the suggester on the sensitive fields, because we have noticed there are some areas like one particular view, let's say an engineer view and a manager view we have. And let's say an engineer view is doing some search on some specific keyword. Since the suggester needs to be very fast, so there are some instances like where the engineer is actually able to view the manager view as well. So that's one recommendation. The next one is filterable. So filterable, it's like whenever we enable, so I will be allowed to do the filtering on that specific field. A quick example will be, let's say I have a person and I have an address as child, and in the address I want to do the search when the particular person is having a country US. So in that conditions, I can pass the filter country equals to US. Uh, the next one is search analyzer. So search analyzer is actually a new feature being added up in the MDM 10.4. Previously, we were having fuzzy, but when we talk about search analyzer, that means we can add our own custom analyzers for a specific field. The last one, we have facets. So facets is actually, it groups the search result values and shows the count for each group. So this is specifically used where we want to actually show the variation of column based on some degree. Next, we have indexing job scenarios. So like when to run the indexing job or when it is automatically going to happen up. So in the left hand side, you can see run initial indexing. So this is the place where we need to explicitly run the indexing job from the Hub console. So for the first scenario, say the existing data, that means whenever we are doing the ideal. So it is recommended whenever you are doing the ideal, do not enable the Elasticsearch. And once the like all the ideal data load is done, then you need to execute the indexing job manually. The second one is the updated configuration, like if I'm doing some changes on the searchable columns or the parameters, like inside the provisioning tool, then I need to rerun the initial indexing job one more time. The third one is indexes deleted, like if I'm manually deleting the indices on the Elasticsearch folder, so I need to run the initial indexing job one more time. But if I talk about in the right hand side, like there are some incremental loads where the search is going to happen automatically because the enable search processing is being checked. The next one is like when we fire the post calls or when we create some record from the E360. So we need not to fire the indexing job. It will going to happen automatically. And the same thing, like if I'm doing some updates via post call or some merges from the E360 UI. So this is the scenario. It is all like the indexing is going to happen internally by the MDM product. Next is execute Smart Search indexing job. So once all the configurations are done and the server restarts are being performed, then we are good to execute the indexing job. And the way we do it, like we open the hub console and traverse to the batch viewer. And once we expand the respective base object where we have the searchable columns, we will be able to see initial indexing Smart Search data, and we can execute it like this. So here we need to make sure like we should have at least one process server which is marked as enable search processing, else you would get some error exceptions. Okay. The important thing here is you will notice that the counts are different, right? So that's because total number of base object rows index, that is showing the number of records what I have in my base object, and total number of records index is actually depends like one particular base object. Let's say I have a party and party is sharing two different business entities, let's say person and organization. So it will create the documents as per the BE level, not on the base object. So that's why we have a different count. Okay. Before we proceed, let's have a quick demo of the how the indexing is going to work on some records what we create. Here is my local environment. So inside the I have created a person business entity. Okay. Under the business entity, I have made some some column as such, like the display name or the first name. And under that, we have a structure like addresses, which is the relationship table between party and address. And then we have an address table. So under address, we have address line 1, 2, city. So this person business entity, which is on the base object C party, I have just made a replica with the help of copy feature, and which is having the same set of searchable column information as well. Now at the backend, what I have done is like I have just loaded one of the dataset via the load job. Okay. And the same respective child as well. This is my address information. So now if I just do a read call on the particular newly loaded base object record, so yeah, I will be able to retrieve the dataset. This is my parent information along with the child dataset. Now, if I do the search call on this same record equals to Sanjay, so I will not be able to retrieve just because we haven't executed the indexing job. And at the same instance, this is the Elasticsearch call on the port 9200 on the index name person. So if I do the search, I will not be able to retrieve because we haven't executed indexing, found equals to false. So now what we will do is let's execute the indexing job. So first we will execute it for the lookup tables because those are the less the low number of data set. Okay, so I believe it got completed. Yeah, it is done. So now if I come back and just execute the same URL, so you will see that the indices for the state got generated, and we can see version equals to 1, found equals to true. And at this instance, if I do the search for Q equals to Sanjay, I will not be able to retrieve just because we haven't executed the indexing for the parent table. So now we are going to execute it for the party table. So it will take some seconds to execute. Let me just quickly refresh it. Yeah, it got completed. Okay. So now if I come back to my indices and do the search for the same record, so I will be able to retrieve the data set. Okay. Here's my parent along with the child information. Now, the interesting thing is if I just copy the URL and put it into a new tab, so here you will be able to see the state information along with the parent information, and version equals to 2 because that's the update happened on the same document. So that's the nested documentation, like the same document is going to get updated. Okay, and found equals to 2, version equals to 2, and the same URL we were having the previous information. only the state information. Okay. One more thing is as I mentioned previously, I have created a one more business entity with EX person, and if I do the search on the same row ID object, I will be able to retrieve the state information along with the parent information. So that suffix, like why there is a difference between the number or the total number of records or the total number of indexed records into the pure indexing that matrix which came up, right? So that's the quick representation of the batch job. Now let's take a quick look on the real-time calls as well. So this is my post call which I just created. Okay. So yeah, so I'm just creating the parent information along with the child data set. So I'm coming into the SOAP UI and just executing the call. So for the REST calls, like we need not to run the indexing job. It will be automatic from the MDM layer. So I'm just copying the row ID object and coming into the read call scenario. So if I just do a read call on this row ID object, I'm able to see that it Informatica along with the specific email. Now, if I do the search with keyword as Informatica, yeah, so I can retrieve the data set. Okay. And the same thing if I just copy the row ID object and do the search on the indices side as well, the Elasticsearch layer. So here is the child information along with the parent information. That's the quick representation of the real-time indexing as well. Back to the slides now. Next we have stopwords. So stopwords are actually global set of words, almost in the range of 1200 to 1300 words, which the search engine filters out during the processing. Okay. So it actually improves the index performance because it does not need to index the words which are being present in the stopwords file. So there are almost like the default set of list. But if in case if we want to customize, then definitely we can go to this particular path under the analysis folder. We will be able to retrieve the stopwords file. Okay, so these are actually, we can say that the noise words. And in the previous versions, if I talk about, like, we need to explicitly dig out into the cyprian mrm.ear to do any sort of changes into this stopword.txt file. But when I talk about from the MDM 10.3 release onwards, we can go to this path and do the changes according to the business need. Just the important catch over here is we need to, once we are doing any sort of changes into this file, right? So we need to manually delete the indexes and restart the Elasticsearch, followed by restarting the MDM, and then we need to reindex the data. So reindexing means whatever the base objects we have, we need to execute the initial indexing job one more time. Okay, so many of the times we have noticed the customers have not performed the same and noticed some challenges. So make sure we follow these steps as well. Next we have Smart Search configuration table. So here, like whatever the changes which we do under the provisioning tool, like marking any sort of column as searchable or suggested any sort of configurations, so those get stored into the c_repos_cocs config table. So if I just select query, so we will be able to see the 8th row where you can see that searchable_co. So this is a block column. So if you just double click over it, so you will be able to retrieve the XML, which will talk about whatever the columns we have marked as searchable. On the same platform, if we focus on the second row, right? So infrastructure. So this is going to talk me about the Elasticsearch nodes, the URL which we have defined, right? The ES node name and the the HTTPS URL. So we can just double click on the blob file and can get the and we can retrieve those specific details. So this is actually helpful. Like there are some scenarios when the provisioning URL is not logging up. So we can come at the backend and we can retrieve the information. So before we proceed further, let's have a quick look on the stopword file. So right now I'm on the Elasticsearch directory, going under the config analysis folder. So I will be just opening into Notepad file. So this stopword file, as you can see, there are a lot of keywords being mentioned up. And if in case if we want to edit, then we can just remove the word, or if we want to add, then we can just append the ones. Just we need to make sure these keywords are not being indexed during the indexing job. So if in case if you are searching any of these keywords, you will not be able to retrieve any data sets. Okay. The next thing is on the database side. So the key table, what we have from the provisioning front is crepos config. So if I just focus on the searchables here, double click on the blob, if I just want to view what all columns I have searchable. So I have just opened this XML over here. So as you can see that it talks about like whatever the business entities, under the business entities, or like whatever the columns you have marked as searchable. So if you notice, I have a person business entity where the birth date or the party type, the display name columns I have marked as searchable equals to true. Same thing, I can retrieve the information on childs as well, like under the childs, what are the column marked as searchable. Okay. The next thing is like the infrastructure.xml. So if I just double click and text it, so here you can see that the whatever the Elasticsearch node URL which we have mentioned, the localhost 9200, so that we can retrieve it. Just one the important information over here is like you should execute the indexing job for all the respective bees which are part of the base object. But there are some scenarios. Let's say I pick this party rel a base object and I execute the indexing job. So it gives me an error like zip53000. The smart search configuration does not include the base object because on this particular base object, I haven't marked any of the column as searchable. So for those errors, we need to make sure we need to execute the indexing only for the ones which are part of the be searchable. Next, we have the business entity search APIs. So there are a couple of APIs which we can fire to retrieve a record. The major classification happens on the basis of queue, FQ, and the action equals to query. So when I say queue, so that is a generic query which is going to do the search on all the searchable columns under the respective business entity. But when I talk about FQ, that's the fielded query. So this is going to do the search on only one respective column, what I'm passing into my request. And the third one, action equals to query. So this is specifically like on the business entity saved query. So this search is going to happen on the database level. So DB query is going to get executed and going to retrieve the records. So with this classification, there are a couple of parameters we can pass into the request. So let's see in the demo right now. So here for our demo, I have just created some dummy data sets. So here you can see these are the information from the parent side and these are the information from the child side. So here this particular row ID object have two addresses just to highlight. Okay. Now let's fire some search APIs to retrieve this data. So the first one we have q equals to Sundar. So this talks about like it is going to search on all the searchable columns, whatever I have defined under the person business entity. So as you can see, like the first name, the last name, and the display name are marked as searchable. So it is going to do the search, and in the response, I'm able to get the record count as 5. The next one we have FQ. So FQ is a fielded query search on a specific field name, which I'm passing as last name as Sundar. In my response side, if I talk about my data set, I am having only one particular record, that is the fourth one, which is having the last name as Sundar. So you notice I am able to see only one particular record count. The next one we have the fielded query, again on the same one specific column display name, but the catch here is if I want to if I'm looking for some data set which is having some space in between, then I need to pass in this format: a single quote followed by the double quote followed by the keyword what I'm looking for, followed by double quotes, and followed by the single quote. Okay, so that's the pattern which we need to follow if we have some spaces in between. Okay. The next one we have action equals to query. So action equals to query is a search which is going to happen on the database side rather than the Elasticsearch. So it is not on the indexes. However, it is going to execute a query on the database, and whatever the response coming back, it is going to show it in the response section. Okay, so here what I'm doing is I'm doing the search on person business entity having a filter where the city name is Gwalior. So if I come to my data set, if you can see, I'm having only one particular record, Sundar Sharma, and that particular record I will be going to see it in the response section. Okay. The next one we have filters. So as we can see, like if you want to more refine the result set, so in the FQ, I'm passing Sundar, having the filters last name as Sharma. So out of all these Sundars, whatever I have, it will just list down only those particular records where the last name is Sharma. So here it is Sharma, and here it is Sharma. The next one we have facets. So facets actually do the group by filtering. So when I say group by filtering, so I'm passing the column as last name. So what it will do is it will just list down, okay, how many times Sharma, the last name, came up. So it is going to give them the label and the specific count. Okay. And followed with, it will be going to showcase all the data set as well in the response side. Okay. If I just go one more level down as well, so on the same call, if I just pass the filter, like in the previous call, we were passing first name and the facets. So now I'm passing first name, facets along with filter. That means on the last name where only the last name equals to Sharma. Okay. So it will list down only the records which is having the Sharma. It will not list down the records which are having the count as 111, because those were with different last names. So next we have a couple of parameters which we can include into our search request. The first one is depth. So it specifies the number of child levels which we want to showcase into our response. So as you can see, Q equals to Sundar, that means it's going to search on all the columns, but while coming up the response, it will provide me the data at the 3 level only. When I say 3 level, the first level is person, the next second level is addresses, and the third level is address. Okay. So it is going to list down till the third child. The next one we have order. So order is like sometimes when we want to do the ordering on a specific column name, we can do that. So here you can see I'm passing the Q equals to sender and order by display name. So on the display name, it will do the ordering. First is B for Bachchan, and then go for P for Pichai, and then the next one is S for Sharma. Okay. The next one we have records to return. So this is specifically used when I'm not interested for all the data set, but I'm looking for specific data like this starting top 2 or 3 ones. So I can use this parameter and specify the number of value, whatever I'm looking for. So here you can see I'm getting the record count as specific 2. The next one we have suppressed links. So as you can see in the previous execution responses, we are having these URLs are coming up, right? So unnecessary these ones. And if we want to refine the results, so we can pass suppress links equals to true. So this will not portray the whatever the links which were actually coming up in the previous calls. The next one we have content metadata xref and read system data fields. So sometimes when there is a need, when I actually want to read the system columns as well, like what we have row ID object the updated by last update date. So we can use the say read system fields true, and I'm focusing on the xref table data. Okay, so this is the way you can execute. The next one we have default page size. So sometimes like when we fire any sort of call, right? So by default the page size is configured as 10. But in case if we want to retrieve more data set, then what we can do is we can use the parameter records to return along with default page size. So it will just increase the page size to 30, whatever the request I'm passing up. Okay, and I'm having total 15 records are coming up. So just to add up in the previous calls, if I talk about, so we were having a page size as 10, the default one. But if in case if there is a need, then we can increase this parameter as well. That also works. So now I have just logged in into the E360 UI application. And as you can see in the right hand side, this is a search box where I can do any sort of freeform search. Here in the drop down, it lists down like whatever the business entities which have at least one searchable column. Okay, so I have chosen the person business entity, and let's say I'm doing a search on some keyword, say John. Okay, so John, it is giving me a suggestions whatever I have like whatever I can do the search, and this is the quick search. This is a smart search results what are coming up. Okay, on the same front, like we have queries as well. So queries is like this search is going to happen on the database layer. And if I say Sundar Pichai, that's just for example, and if I click on run, so this is going to use the database query and going to showcase me the response. So there are two types of search, one at the smart search at the top right, and in the left hand side, this is a queries based on the action equals to query, the database one. So next we have a quick tip and trick on the E360 search call. Say whenever we do the search, what we can do is we can enable the Google network logs. Okay, and Once we enable, so whatever the search we are going to fire, we can just trace it. What's the request URL getting framed up, and what are the input parameters like in the query string. So here you can see I am doing the search for q equals to John, and it will do the search for all the active and pending records having the output view as person view. Okay, so if in case sometimes the Elasticsearch call is not working, then what we can do is we can go to the debugger and take this request URL and hit it on the explicitly on the browser just to see whether that works or not. So now moving further, we have troubleshoot smart search outside the MDM. So here we are going to discuss about the Elasticsearch REST calls, which we can execute for the troubleshooting scenarios. Just to see when the if someone says that search is not working, so we can actually check whether the issue is from the MDM side or whether the issue is from the Elasticsearch engine side. Okay, so when I say Elasticsearch REST call, so those are going to get executed on port 9200. And the way we do it, like we need to import the Elasticsearch certificate into the respective browser. So once we import the certificate, we will be able to execute some Elasticsearch calls. So the detailed explanation how to do that, it is mentioned in the KB 566891 as well. And there are some APIs which we will be going to talk about in our demo. Let's have a quick look. So I have just jumped on my local environment, and I have just imported the Elasticsearch certificate on the browser. So post that, if I just hit the URL, the Elasticsearch IP followed with the host name, followed with the Elasticsearch port /_cat. So I will be able to see what Elasticsearch APIs we can hit up. Okay. So starting with the one, let's say I need to list down whatever the indices I have. So I need to hit _cat/indices. So this will list down all the indices, whatever we have in our schema. So the important things is like we need to make sure all the indices health should always be in green color. That should not traverse to red. The next is like this is the representation of the logical. This is actually the logical representation of the index, and this is the hashed value for the particular respective Elasticsearch index where the data is going to get stored. And if you match like whatever the indices, the hashed value we have, that actually matches up whatever we have in our file system. Okay, and the next thing it represents like whatever the docs counts being generated. So let's say if I just particular pick the index of the person one and I just put it over here and just hit this underscore mapping URL. So that will actually portray me the definition of the respective index, like what all columns are marked as searchable. So this is my person having some addresses. So address line 1 is marked as searchable. The copy address line 2, this all information. This is actually the definition where we can see what all columns are being marked as searchable. And say if I need to search for some specific row ID object, so that's the syntax. I just need to pass the row ID object over here, specifying like what is the index on which I want to do the search. So as soon as if I just pass here, you can see that that's the row ID object 461922, and it is having these particular address information. There are two addresses, and this is my the party level information, and this is my child level information. Okay, so here version equals to 5, that means 5 time updates have been happened. That's the nested documentation. Let's say in the same thing, let's say if I just put some dummy row ID object, let's say 4 times 0, so you can see that found equals to false. So there is no search record which is having with row ID object 4 times 0. That's the quick like representation what all Elasticsearch request we need to focus. After covering the search APIs, next we have MDM 10.4 features. So with respect to 10.4, so there are primitive 2 features being added up. The first one is a reordering of filters in the Smart Search. So previously, if I come to the provisioning tool, I was just having an option where I can choose like whatever the business entity view I can use for my particular BE. But now with respect to 10.4, you can also do the customization like what all columns you are more interested up out of all the view and in what order you want to represent. Okay, so previously by default all the columns under the view was getting listed down, but now we have an option we can segregate as per our need, and this configuration whatever you are doing up, right, so this configuration gets stored into the CRepos component instance. The next feature we have externalize the search, the Elasticsearch analyzer chain. So once you go into the provisioning tool and go to the configuration, under the Elasticsearch cluster, we have one more option now, Elasticsearch Index. So this is a place like if I want to do some configurations or with respect to the tokenizers or analyzers. So this is a place where we can do the change. So here the primitive thing is if you are doing any sort of change, so we need to make sure we need to run the indexing job after that. So that's the must condition. So here you can add some like stopwords as well. So just make sure you should have a proper understanding like how the configuration needs to be done before we try. So those are the two features which have been added up as part of 10.4 release. The next is Elasticsearch different architecture setup. So here we are going to discuss in what all ways we can configure the Elasticsearch node on different environments. The most basic one is co-located architecture. Say we have a machine A where we have the hub server and the process server running on the same and the Elasticsearch node running on the same JVM. So this is actually a typical out-of-box installation. Usually we have it on our HODs or the VMs are being set up in this way. So this sort of setup we actually do not recommend for the production environments. This is good for the lower environments where we have, let's say, a 4 to 5 number of bees and some less APIs or some less particular E360 users being working up. The next one we have the dedicated ES node. So here you can see that we have a machine A where we have hub server and process server, and machine B which is having the Elasticsearch one. So it is also important to ensure that each machine should not host more than one Elasticsearch node, because when we do that, there are some contentions on the disk I/O, and we have noticed that it actually causes the environmental issues as well. So this setup is actually all right for the production environment where we do not have a high number of bees or the high volume of data. The next architecture we have a co-located cluster. So this is specifically like we have higher environments, say the QA, UAT, or the broad environments where we will have multiple no machines, right? Which will be actually clustered in MDM. Say we have machine A, hub server, process server, and machine B, hub server, process server, which are actually formed in a cluster. So here we can dedicate each Elasticsearch node on each of the machine and basically cluster them. And it actually can form a cluster scenario. So this setup is something which we can use, or it works for the production environment, basically when we have medium to high level data or the business entities. The last one, the clustered Elasticsearch in a multi-domain MDM. So here what we are going to have is we are actually creating a cluster, but on a separate set of nodes. Let's assume we have machine A to machine Z having in a cluster, and whatever number of machines that are present in MDM installation. Okay, in the same way, we can dedicate machines instead of Elasticsearch node being running on the same MDM process, like where my hub server and process server is. I can dedicate a specific machine for the Elasticsearch node. So this is specifically when we have high number of API calls and the searches for the E360 UI and good amount of data. And when I say good amount of data, so I'm actually talking about almost more than 50 or 100 million indexes, not just record, because index will actually multiply if the particular record is being a part of two business entities or so on. So this setup is actually being recommended if you are facing any sort of performance issues as well. Also to add important parameter, like whatever the machine numbers we have, right, the number specific, say n, so that number should always be a odd number because of split plane scenario. Next, we have performance and best practices. So taking the important ones. So you should always run the indexing on the lookup table first, followed by your key volume tables. And whenever you are doing the indexing, so you should execute on all the base objects or the lookup tables, which are being part of your searchable configuration. And you should not execute the indexing job in parallel, right? And one more thing, like whenever you are executing a clean table API, so it will delete the records. So we need to manually delete all the indexes and then regenerate them. So that is one more point to take care of. And with respect to Elasticsearch, like there are some limitations, like we cannot have more than 50 searchable fields or with respect to one business entity. And whenever in the response side as well, this much number of bytes, we can have it into the response. If it is having more, then you can land up to some errors as well. Adding on, if in case if you are using any sort of accelerators like customer 360 or supplier 360, so we have a lot of extra Bs, right? So if in case you are not using those respective bees, so better to remove the searchable configurations, which will actually improve your indexing performance. With respect to facet fields, so we should not mark the low entropy fields as searchable. Quick example will be last update date. Okay. So there's one more important point, that there should be always a monitoring tool on the disk space of the Elasticsearch server, because it has a condition like as soon as the disk space goes less than 15%, it will mark all the indices as particular read only. Okay, so this specific thing we need to take care of. Coming to the no limitations of Smart Search. So the first one is like there are some mismatch with respect to the case sensitivity whenever we mark the column as facet enabled. Also, whenever we search with the keyword hash, so there are no search results being displayed. And right now there is no such way where we can do the search on multiple business entities in a single call. Also, there are some scenarios when we have multiple business entities sharing the same root based object. So there is no such provision where we can have a role based restriction. Also, with respect to auto merge, like whenever we merge any two particular records, so the losing record indices doesn't get deleted. That results into the duplicate search results. That's all we have for the today's webinar. Thank you. Now we are open for Q&A.
Hi everyone, we'll be answering to your questions.
So coming to the questions now, I think most of the questions are being answered. But with respect to the questions which are being asked, so like the most frequent question where it is being pointed up is the filtered query. So let me just elaborate on that point as well. So filtered query is something like if I'm trying to do a search on specific some child, so how the search is going to happen, like during the indexing, whenever you are doing any sort of the like the search or the smart search call, so it will go at the Elasticsearch layer and search whatever the keyword is. Like say I'm searching for say with a keyword as William. So it will search on all the searchable columns, whatever you have defined at the parent layer along with the child layer. And wherever the William is going to have it, it is going to come back into the MDM get call response. So under that response, it depends on you like how much fragmentation you want to perform with respect to the records. The next question, what we have, any space monitoring tools? What we have like on the Elasticsearch layer. So right now we don't have anything, but yes, we can make some script file just to see if there is any sort of disk space goes more than like 85%, then it should raise or some like alerts. Or we can also use some Panopta alerts or which will keep on eye on the disk space as well. The next question what we have, is there a way to find the status of the initial indexing job, how many records have been processed and how many records to process estimated time? Yes, that we can do. So as soon as you execute the initial indexing job, internally the LSSO table gets created, which specifies how many blocks are being divided as per the number of data. So from the CMX server logs, we can actually monitor how many blocks are being processed and per block is taking how much time. So from those evaluation, we can actually calculate the index job is going to take how much time. The next question we have, what's the maximum number of records we can get in a REST call? So by default, we usually get 10 records like whenever we fire any sort of smart search call. But if you want to increase, that also we can do. The next question, if we have like if it is hosted MDM platform, ES comes with 10.4 upgrade. Yes, like whenever if any customer is on the hosted platform on 10.4, so we usually configure the Elasticsearch as well, and that is on the different machine. The next question we have, can we configure Elasticsearch on the load balancer if we don't want to cluster them? Yes, it is possible as well. Next question what we have, say we have implemented Elasticsearch in lower environment and now we want to implement in prod. So can we clone the lower environment and update the pointers to the MDM instances? Yes, that is possible. But the recommendation is when you go for the production environment, better to have the Elasticsearch on a separate JVM. When I say separate JVM, that means a separate machine. Along with, it's better to have a cluster in the production environment, so that if one node crash, we should have a other node which will be able to search the records and to respond back. The next question what we have, like what is the highest version of Elasticsearch supported with Tenderflow? So right now version 6.2.3 is being supported, and as per the new next releases, there are some chances where we are going to upgrade the Elasticsearch version as well. The next question we have is any upgrades to Elasticsearch, the ES server will be shipped from Informatica or customers are upgraded themselves. So as I mentioned, like if a customer is coming from 10.3 branch, so they need not to do anything, like they can use whatever the Elasticsearch package which we have from the installers. But when we talk about the 10.4 customers, so they need to download the Elasticsearch package from the like the ES portal. Yeah, that's all we have questions for today. Any further questions?
Let's wait for 5 more minutes, Prashant. We'll request all the participants to please post their questions in the Q&A, and we'll be answering them. The recording for the session will be available in the Success portal, and the link for the record will also be emailed to you. I think we have more questions, Prashant.
Sure, Vidya. Okay. The next question is what we have, where I can find the installation document for Elasticsearch. So as I mentioned, we have a like the written KB 564677. So that specifies like what are the configuration steps which we need to do as part of Smart Search setup. And regards to the ES package download, so you can go on the Elasticsearch portal and download the necessaries. Like if it is Linux, then we need a jar file, or if it is Windows, then we need a zip file. Will this recording will be made available? Yes, like post this session, we are going to share the recording along with the PPT as well. The next question we have, can I get the index name based on the row ID object? So right now there is a limitation on the row ID object. We cannot have an index. Next we have how a connection pool settings at the application server level and Elasticsearch at the CMX server.properties file are different. So since this is an Elasticsearch, so Elasticsearch will do asynchronous level calls. So the property which I mentioned, EX max connection per host, right? So that defines whatever the connection pool which we are going to use. The default value is 100. The next we have, in case of load balancer LB but not cluster topology, will there not be out of sync in indices? So actually, just to iterate, the Elasticsearch is not supported on the load balancer. That's we have the limitation right now. The next we have in 10.3 also Elasticsearch is there. So what exactly we have in 10.4? So in 10.4 there are the new two features which are being added up. The first one is like we can reorder the search results, whatever being like displayed into the E360 UI screen. And the second thing, like we can also add the tokenizers or the filters from the provisioning tool. What we were doing it manually inside the file system level. Next we have, can you please talk about the new features of 10.4 over 10.3? So yeah, so as I just mentioned, the first is like the reordering of the search results. Like in the search results, when you do the search, so in the left hand side, by default, all the columns, whatever being are present in the composite object.xml on the business entity, all were getting displayed. But now we can choose whatever the business wants, and we can classify them whether we are just needing the parent level columns or we can need the child level columns. That was the first feature. And the second feature is like from 10.4 onwards, inside the provisioning tool, when we go and configure the Elasticsearch cluster, under that we can configure what are the tokenizers or the analyzers. Like let's say if I want to still do some refined level of results on some specific columns, then I can do my own configuration as well. Next one we have, can date fields be a part of Elasticsearch? Right now, yes, it can have, but there are some limitations on that area because when we talk about date, so it is actually a low entropy field. Can I get the index relevant information based on the row ID object? Yes, you can do that. So if you talk about on the MDM side, so you can search for the keyword and it will just show us like what are the information we have, or also you can do the Elasticsearch call. So Elasticsearch call under like the under doc, you can pass the row ID object on a specific index name, and that will retrieve all the indexes of that particular record. Next we have, is there any known limitation on character set that does not supported by Smart Search like @? Yes, there are some characters like if during my presentation we have notified hash, that is one of the keyword where the Elasticsearch will not be going to retrieve the records. Next we have, when we talk about the search analyzers or tokenizers, what are the advantages of it? So previous to 10.4, we need to do the configurations under the plugin, like that is at the file system level. But when we talk about from the 10.4, so we can do the configurations from the UI level only. So UI will actually illustrate us what the tokenizer we are going to choose and on which specific field. Next, we have any KB for migrating from Solar to Elasticsearch. So with respect to configuration of Elasticsearch, you can recommend, you can go through with the KB 564677. So that defines like what are the configurations we need to do with respect to the Elasticsearch layer. The next we have, can we get the detailed information regards to shards and replicas? What's the default things related to that? Okay, so by default, like if you don't configure any sort of property, so the shards will be taken up like whatever the number of the Elasticsearch nodes you have, and replicas, the default value is 1. And in case if there is a like say pod based environment where we want to have a DR based, then we can increase these shards and replicas property into the CMX server and CMX clients. Can you please explain the connection settings on the CMX server properties file, how it is different from the app server connection pool? Okay, so when we talk about the app server, we were having the data sources, like we define the GDBC connection. But when we talk about on the CMX server properties, the property, the CMX server max connection per host, so that is like the HTTP connections which are going to formulate from the process server to the Elasticsearch. So all the execution will be going via HTTP. The request will be sent to the Elasticsearch for the indexing, and as per that, the response is going to come back. Do we have a full backward compatibility when we upgrade from 10.3 to 10.4? Yes, we do have. With respect to Elasticsearch, we can do. The next we have, is it possible to have multiple stopword list for different attribute, or have the stopword list ignore certain attributes? We have pain points where a lot of common words we want to add into our stopword list, which can't be added as there are some overlap with ISO country codes. For example, the word and is a country code for Andorra, but would be a good word to add it to the stopword. So I'm not sure whether I understood the question correctly, but yes, like as per the stopwords, you can customize as per your need, and that will be applicable for all the searchable columns, like whatever you have as per your data model. The next one, we have, any code configurations are required when we upgrade from 10.3 to 10.4? No, there are no sort of configuration changes we need to do. Just the only major change is like inside the provisioning tool, previously we were having the column as like there was a parameter fuzzy. But when you talk about 10.4, so from 10.4, we were having the search analyzer. Num replicas help in performance of search or just help in high availability? So when you talk about replicas, so that actually helps with respect to high availability. Is there any way or API that I can delete particular index related to row ID object? Yes, we do have a API, like we can fire a curl command, but just to elaborate, that needs to be used precisely, because at any cost we should not delete the wrong data. So if in case if you want, you can feel free to reach out to GCS. We can help you over the same. The next is, do we have to rerun the initial index job when upgrade from 10.3 hotfix 1 to 10.4? So as part of precautionary step, what we recommend better to do once, in case if you are doing any sort of configuration changes with respect to the provisioning tool.
So I can see there are some questions which are not being clear. So if in case, if you have still any doubts, then you can please feel free to write to us as well.
Thanks, Prashant. It looks like we have answered most of the questions. If we have missed on any, we'll get back to you after the session. Please spend some time for the survey to give us feedback on the webinar. Hope everyone is safe and sound at this point. Thanks for joining the webinar. Thanks a lot.